For some of you, it's going to be a little easier. There's a few of you, it's been a while. You don't have to admit how long it's been, but it's been a while for some folks in the room, you know what I'm saying? It's part of life, you know. But do your best you can, even if it's super recent or if it's been a long time. Let's go back to like kindergarten, pre-K for a second, okay? And remember when you started learning math. All right, so let's just take a minute. It's just like when we started to learn math. It starts probably just a little bit before that when you're like counting, you know, you're like 1, 2, 3, like you have these numbers, right? And then I remember Hadley, my little girl, I had a video I was looking at, Facebook Memories of the day, where she was turning 3 and we had a birthday party. And so we had this inflatable thing with a little pool in it, and you can slide down. We had rented it. And so she's out there waiting for the water hose to fill up the little pool part, and she is so excited. She's got this cute little bathing suit on and this cute little haircut. And I'm looking at her, and I was like, hey, how old are you? I'm videoing her. How old are you? And she turns around, and she's like, 2. And I was like, no, you were 2 yesterday, but today you're 3. I said, how old are you? She was like, 3. I'm like, yeah, that's 3. Show me how many 3 is. And she's like, I'm like, no, put a finger down. She's like, trying to get one finger to go down. She can't decide which one she wants to go down. So we do the whole thing, and she's like, 3. Like, no, there's another one there. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's where we started learning math, is where numbers are. And then eventually we were like, hey, you know what? I can count to 10. Anybody want to watch me count to 10? Hey, Dad, watch. I can count to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, right? And then we get to 10. And then we learn that you can go past 10. There's 20s and 30s and 40s. And then before you know it, you can count to 100. And say, man, I can count to 100. And then you realize there's a lot more numbers. It just keeps going. And by the time you realize that it just keeps going, you're at the next part, which is, hey, you know what? You can take those numbers and you can add them together. Now, you can take one particular number, add it with another one, and get a whole completely different number. Like, that's mind-blowing. And so we work on addition. I was like, yeah, okay, 2 plus 2 equals 4. This is cool. I didn't know that. I thought we could just count 1, 2, 3, 4. But evidently there's people in the world that want to take 2 of one thing and 2 another one and not just go 1, 2, 3, 4. They want to add them together and get it quick. All right, so we got it. All right, this is cool. Moving to the next step. And then they're like, hey, not only can you add numbers together, you can take numbers away. You can subtract. And it's like, what? What? Okay, so now I can have 4 and take away 2, and now I got 2. And this is great. So now I can count, I can add things together, I can subtract, I can take over the world. And they're like, no, there's the next step. You got to multiply numbers. It's like, what? Multiply numbers? Why would anyone want to do that? Adding is very much so sufficient. Well, let's just add them together. And then you can't even count them on your hands or your fingers no more. You got to look at flashcards. And the flashcards give you multiplication facts. And you're supposed to remember. You're supposed to remember what 7 times 6 is. Anybody? Boom. It worked. See? Proof. It worked. Right? You're supposed to remember what those things are. And then by the time you get that down, like, oh, by the way, you can divide those numbers too. Like, are you kidding me? And then you realize not only can you divide them, you can long divide them. Why would anyone want to do the long version of dividing them? Isn't there just like facts you can just flip over and just remember what they are? When you get past that, they introduce this new concept, fractions. And it's like, what? I was good with the adding and the counting, the subtracting, the multiplying, the dividing, the long dividing, the numbers. But now you're saying there's pieces of numbers, which are, by the way, small numbers. So these little tiny numbers that make up the big numbers that would do all the adding and subtracting. And so then you figured out, okay, well, you can add fractions. Oh, man, I don't know. I don't know. You give me a piece of this and a piece of that, and it's still not a whole one. That's all I know. You know what I'm saying? Unless sometimes the big number on top is really big, and it ruins everything. And before you know it, they say, hey, you can not only add those things, you can multiply them. And now we're not even multiplying across. We're going X, Y's, and Z's and all these things. And we've got huge numbers. And then to get the actual number at the end, you multiply them. And then you have to divide it out to get the number. And it leaves you with another fraction. And then you walk into freshman year of Algebra 1. And there's a freaking letter on the board, and you're like, you have got to be kidding me. The book of Ephesians is very much like the way we've learned math. Every piece and part builds on one another. So let me be honest with you. Today, we're almost at the end of our 2-part series. And what we're going to talk about today is really, really important. But if you have no idea what's happened before, it'd be like walking in to a freshman math class and you seeing up there on the board 2 times x equals 8, but you've never learned to count. You have no idea multiplying, adding, none of those things. It's just, what in the world is this? So I want to take a couple minutes, just in case there's some folks that are here that have missed a couple weeks, or maybe you're here for the first time. Because I don't want us to get to the point here in just a few moments and you'd be like, I'm just not figuring out how to connect it. And it's essential that we get these first few parts correct. So it begins with, there's a church planter named Paul who's in prison in Rome because he's planting churches and talking about a resurrected Jesus. Not a spiritually resurrected Jesus, but a physically resurrected Jesus. A guy they put on the cross, put in a grave, and then on Sunday, following that Friday, walked out of the grave very much alive. And so he's planting churches. He has changed his life. And this has landed him in prison. He's writing a letter, multiple letters. We have this one particular letter. And he begins to tell us inside of this letter that, hey, I got some really big truths to tell you. One of the huge truths we're going to talk about today. But he begins by saying this. Here's the deal. In Ephesians, he says, hey, God chose you. And God chose every piece and part of you. Before the foundations of the world were laid, God chose you, which means he chose you before you were you. In other words, God chose you with the bad pieces and the really good pieces. Your greatest decisions and your worst decisions, all of those lumped into one, everything that makes you, you, the good experiences, the bad. God said, I want you. I want all of that. That's what I want. I want to choose you. In addition to God choosing us, he didn't just simply make an intellectual decision. He moved in our direction. His choosing was followed up by action. And so he moved in our direction. And so God chose us, God moved towards us, and in his moving towards us, it wasn't enough just for him to save us with Jesus. He said, I'm going to prepare in advance these incredible things for you to be a part of that's about a kingdom movement that's going to move throughout the entire world. And so I'm going to choose you, I'm going to move towards you, and I'm going to prepare in advance for you to be a part of the movement that I'm starting. That's what God's saying. From that, we find that God gave us an incredible gift that we know today as the church. Now, we had to spend a few moments on this week, a few weeks ago, and admit that while the gift was incredible, we have messed it up a pretty good bit. Because the church is organized and put in motion by a number of individuals like myself that are very much so imperfect and broken and make a lot of mistakes. And unfortunately, the church has had some struggles throughout our history not wanting to acknowledge those mistakes. And instead, we would just rather sweep them under the rug and pretend they didn't happen. Things like racism and segregation, and things like not saying anything about it or allowing it or encouraging it or actually talking about the differences. And we've got to acknowledge, like, hey, that's a part of our past, and it's gross and it's disgusting, it's messy, and I can't believe it happened, but it happened. Or we've got the more recent allegations that are flooding the church of abuse. Whether it's leadership abuse or whether it's child abuse. And the church is full of people that have made really terrible mistakes. But even still, God has made a decision to use the church. Because when the church does get it right, it's an incredibly beautiful gift. And that was part 1 of our series on Ephesians. What God did. Like, God did what? And that's what God did. He chose us. He moved towards us. He prepared in advance for us, and he gifted us the church. And then we started this second part of the series, which is responsible for me. And last week we took a look at in part 1 of this, where we took a look at our responsibility in terms of the idea that unity begins with us. We said unity always needs a catalyst. And we looked at a tragedy and a triumph last week, both of which produced unity in our nation. But in both of those instances, both the tragedy and the triumph, the unity only lasted for a few weeks, maybe a month, and then it fizzled out. And so we said, we've got to get a better catalyst that is constant, that's not reliant on the highs of an emotion or the lows of an emotion to produce unity. And we said, hey, at the end of the day, what we realize through the Word of God is that us as individuals, we are the staying power. We are the constant. We are in our world, and we are perfectly placed to be a catalyst for unity. That we have the opportunity to bring people to one. And we even went through a few things laid out in Scripture that says, hey, we should be one on. We should be one, that there's one body of believers, that there's lots of different churches doing lots of different things, but the truth is, it takes all kinds of churches to reach all types of people. But as one, there's one body of believers. That there's one Spirit of God, that there's one hope, that there's one Lord, there's one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all. And that we should be unified on those things. And that we should fight with everything that we have to stay as one. And then we get to this week. And he starts with this really interesting comment moment that at first glance feels a little out of place. But I think you'll find it fits perfectly into the purpose of what he's wanting to accomplish. He says this in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 11. So Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and the teachers. Now this is interesting. This is very interesting because all of a sudden he's talking about people who have a leadership role inside of this church that he has gifted the world. And it says that Christ himself has given these particular people. These apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. Now, these particular titles can be a very divisive point of contention. Very divisive. And in fact, you could get into the idea of, okay, are there still apostles here? Right? Now, if you were to ask me, I would say, hey, the office of being an apostle is something that came to a close when those in the New Testament came to a close, when they breathed their last. That's when the office of being an apostle has come to a close. I would also say the same thing in terms of there being a prophetic movement or a prophetic office that's held for an enormous group of people, that those prophets are no longer needed anymore because we have the completed work of what we know as the Bible. That is what I've studied, and that's the conclusion I've come to. There are a lot of people that would disagree. There are a lot of other people who disagree. In fact, there's a lot of people that hold my position in other churches, and they're referred to as apostles, right? Right? Nobody calls me an apostle because I'll say, hey, I think it's done. But nobody calls me an apostle. Don't call me an apostle. I can't handle that kind of responsibility, right? It's a big thing. However, here's the deal. This is one of those things. This is a great example that honestly, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So let's pretend for a second that I was having a conversation for someone who vehemently disagrees. It's complete opposite side. Says, no, there are still apostles and there are still prophets. Okay, cool. That's great. That's cool. It doesn't bother me at all. I'm not going to look at someone's business card and say, hey, you know what? This title in here is theologically incorrect according to my studies, and I'd like to have a meeting with you about it. Like, that's what we're going to do. Because remember, the beginning of this whole thing says we should do everything we can to create unity about those other things. Right? Those other things. Now, if someone were to say, hey, you know what? You and I are not on the same page on this, right? They call me an apostle, or I call this person an apostle at my church, and you're saying they don't exist anymore. Do you think we could study it together and figure out how you came to that conclusion, how I came to that conclusion? I'm all in. Let's do it. Yeah, for sure. Let's study it together. But I ain't going to think twice about hanging out with you or talking to you or going to church with you or anything else with you, to be honest with you. It just doesn't matter. What is for sure, no matter what you think about that, and some of you who are really new to faith are like, why does this matter at all? It doesn't. But people get real hung up on it. Because here's the truth. No matter what you believe on that end, whether it has come to a close with the first century church or whether it continues today, the responsibility of every single one of them, according to the church planner Paul, is the same. Here's why Christ himself gave apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers, leaders in the church. This is why. We find it in verse 12. No matter what you believe about this, that, and the other, this is the reason, this is the cause. To equip his people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. Now, I want to push pause for a second. I'm going to reread that to you. This time, I want you to listen, but I don't want you to listen as you're listening to a verse in the Bible. I want you to listen as you're listening to my personal job description. And then I would really encourage you to judge me and our staff that's here according to what we're going to read in this job description. And in fact, no matter where you go, if you stay at Foundation for a long time, or you decide that your family needs to go somewhere else, or you move across the country, or whatever you decide to do, I would encourage you, pull out your Bible app and highlight this and say, hey, this is the pastor's job description. And I always need to be asking, is he doing his job description? Now, all of you got job descriptions too, every single one of you, unless you're retired, and then it's just like whatever I want to, come on. Unless you're married, and it's whatever my wife tells me to do, come on. Ain't that right, Mr. Johnny? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's it. Yep. Right, that's it. So I'm going to read it to you again. This time, I want you to hear it and ask the question, am I living up to the responsibilities that for sure I don't get to choose, have been assigned to me? To equip his people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. No matter what else I want to do, I got to be about that. There's a few really interesting things I want to talk about in that particular little passage we just read. The first one is this really incredible word, his. It says to equip his people. He's talking about Jesus. Now, for folks that lead anything, especially in the church, and this is another issue that's kind of running rampant in churches that are growing, is that people that sit in my position, we begin to think to ourselves that these are my people, right? But Paul very clearly says, hey, let me just remind you, to equip his people for works of service. His people. And I ain't none of these people here, it ain't my church, right? Foundation isn't my church. It's Jesus' church. Not my people. It's Jesus' people. It says, hey, to equip his people for works of service. When I think through this, equipping people for works of service, my first thought is from a strategic leader kind of mindset. It's like, really? Like if I had to narrow down the things that when I was in Bible college, I would have like, here, this is the main thing, right? This is what I want to do. This is my whole thing. Like this is, if Paul had to write me a job description, this is what he would write. This wouldn't be on it. Like it might be at the bottom, you know, but there's other things. There's other things on it. It's like, hey, no, that's it. To equip people, his people, for works of service. You see, the thing that I would put on it is the how I do that. Because I would have said, you know what? I need to preach compelling, thought-provoking, actionable messages, right? That like change people's way of thinking. That's what I would have said. That's my thing. But the truth is, if I get up here and I do some of that every week, but it doesn't equip anybody for works of service, then I'm just wasting the air. I'm just sucking up what someone else could be breathing. Equipping people for works of service. When I look at the word equip and I look at the dictionary, this is what it says. It's defined as this: to supply with the necessary items for a particular purpose. And so as I think through, as someone who's in a leadership position in the church, as a pastor or a teacher, that's what I got to ask myself. Am I supplying you with the necessary items for a particular purpose? Now, the question is, why is serving such a big deal? Why is this works of service such a huge deal? In the midst of this my responsibility thing, like of all the things, like, I mean, I just got so many other religious thoughts that are happening, but you want to focus down on do everything you can to stay united and promote unity and get ready to serve people. Like, that's it? That's really what you want? When he gives a little compelling argument, we'll take a look at. The first thing he says why service is so important, why serving others is so important, he says, so the body of Christ may be built up. In other words, there's a direct connection on the followers of Jesus that sit inside of a group or a gathering of believers and their willingness and ability to serve others in the building up of that body, the growth of that body, the maturing of that body. Now, when we think through that, that's scary. And we have a thing called Discover Foundation today, and it happens after this gathering. And any of you are invited. It's not too late to sign up. You can sign up on the Church Center app. But it's an opportunity for me to share and for Brooke Buchanan and my wife to share just kind of the heartbeat of who we are as a church and why we do what we do. And one of the pieces, I'll spoil it for you, one of the pieces that we talk about is there's this old saying in churches where 20% of the people do 80% of the work. I don't know if you've heard that before, but that's just this old saying. And I tell people at Foundation that cannot ever be the case. On a typical Sunday morning, it takes us somewhere between 95 and 145 volunteers to pull off what we want to do. At full capacity is 145. Like if we're achieving every single thing we set out to do, it'll take 145 volunteers on a Sunday morning. We can get by with 95 of those volunteers, right? Just barely scraping the minimum, okay? So there's opportunities abounding for people to get involved and to be engaged. And we set it up that way that we are incredibly dependent on people on Sunday mornings. It's not just dependent on me. It's not just dependent on our staff. It's everybody pulling together. And that's the reason Foundation continues to grow. Because people continue to come and do more than just sit and listen. They realize this is real and they want in the game. If you've ever been a first-time guest here, which clearly all of you have to have been at some point, that's the way this works. Since the very beginning, we do something with every single first-time guest that goes to the green tent. So if you're a first-time guest with us, your next step is the green tent right when we get out. I'll go ahead and give you a preview of what's going to happen. We're going to send you a survey. The survey's 5 questions, and then there's a little box at the end. This is, hey, any other comments or thoughts you're willing to share. The survey's anonymous. We don't know who sends them. Unless someone sends a survey and then sends a thing and says, hey, did you get my survey? Then we know who it is. Or sometimes when you put your name in the comments, says, hey, this was so-and-so, please follow me or whatever. But we don't know, right? And so people send in surveys, they fill it out. It's just 5 questions. It's a multiple choice thing, and there's a box at the end if you want to put some thoughts in. This is one of the comments that we've gotten. So if you're sitting in here and you wrote this, and you're like, why didn't you ask me permission? Because it was anonymous. I don't know who wrote it, okay? Get offended somewhere else. Here we go. I'm going to change one word so you don't copyright me or something. I don't know which word, but I'm going to choose one of these in here and I'm going to change it. I'm not. I'm just going to read it. You'll be fine. This is what they said. I've always been in a battle with faith, and I've struggled with it the most the last 2 years. From the moment I heard about your church, I was intrigued. I could tell someone was just pushing me towards y'all. I know in my heart of hearts that someone was Jesus. And I'm so thankful he did because I do belong there. I loved every second of Sunday, and I will be back and back again. Y'all made me feel something I have never ever felt, and that is the true power of God's work. I promise you that when they were writing that, they were not thinking about me teaching on Sunday mornings. 0 chance. I promise you, when they were reading that or writing that, they were not thinking about our band nailing it. They weren't thinking about that. You know what they were thinking about? They were thinking about the people who were out in the parking lot, who made sure they knew exactly where they were supposed to go and didn't feel like a outcast because they couldn't figure it out. They were thinking about the people, I don't know if they had kids or not, but they were thinking about the people who took them in at the kids' check. And even though they had and every other mom was around there acting like they got their stuff together and they knew exactly which buttons to push and all those things. And they were the only one, and they're like, man, I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. They were thinking about the person that said, hey, it's right this way, come on. Let me help you get checked in. They were thinking about the people who stood at the door when they went and got their kids at the end. And the interaction they had. And they were thinking about the people that maybe served them ice cream out of the truck after it was over or stood at a tent where they had questions. That's what they were thinking about. Sunday morning serving is incredibly important. But I'll be honest with you, it is nowhere near as important as the other 167 hours in a week. And for sure, my job description says to equip all of God's people for works of service. But if my primary focus is to equip you to serve on Sunday mornings at Foundation, then I am a failure. Because the other 167 hours a week, that's where the magic is. That's where the miracles happen. People are our destination. And if Jesus is in the lead, they always will be our destination. We want to make sure that you are equipped to do both. That you recognize that sitting and just consuming on Sundays, it's good for a short season of your life. But at some point, you've got to put some skin in the game, and it's not just Sunday mornings, it's the other 167 hours God gives you. So serving allows the body of Christ to be built up. Serving, according to this passage from Paul, also produces that unity we talked about last week. We talked about puzzle pieces, how everybody fits in a very specific place, that everyone's incredibly unique, yet when they all fit together in the perfect place, it creates one picture. That regardless of how diverse we are, how unique we are, when we all unite around a common cause or push against a common enemy, we can do incredible things as one. It produces unity. We also see that serving creates a maturity in our faith. When we look at the original language, the language he uses is a full-grown, mature man. In other words, that when we look at faith, it's at the peak. There's nothing else growing, that it's as strong as it's going to get, that it's as developed as it possibly can be. And that serving helps get to that process of full-grown faith. We see that serving leads to growth, not just personal growth, but other people's growth. But we have to be really careful. We just mentioned this a couple minutes ago. We have to be cautious, because the truth is that spiritual consumerism is anti-Jesus. And so we think in terms of serving and uniting and going against a cause. We do have these seasons, which I mentioned, where it's okay just to sit and chill and to consume. But at some point, you consume and you consume and you consume. And then at some point, there's a line that you cross. And it's difficult to see where that line is. But once you cross that line, you've gone into, I am anti-Jesus. The only thing I am for is me consuming something that makes me feel a little bit better, that gets me to Monday. There's something more than that. There's something more than that. It reminds me of one of my favorite movies, The Gladiator. Anybody a Gladiator fan? Yeah, I love Gladiator. I'm pumped right now. Let's go! There's this one particular part in the movie where he's in a battle that he's not supposed to win. Not the end, there's one in the middle. And he's not supposed to win it like this other crew is supposed to, and he's done. And everyone is shocked. They're like, oh my gosh, he's a miracle. He's so handsome. He's muscles. But he's got him, right? And all of a sudden he throws down his sword and he looks around and goes, are you not entertained? Y'all remember that part? That's a good part. He's so hardcore. Let's go, Maximus. That's not Sunday mornings are not supposed to be that. Are you not entertained? That's not the question we're asking, is it? The truth is, when you engage in serving, your perspective changes. Anybody remember being a teenager? Yeah? Any teenagers in the room? Just raise your hand, teenagers. All right, cool. So we're going to pretend you're not here. I'm going to talk just right through you for a second. Right? As a teenager, I thought I knew stuff. I thought I knew a lot of stuff. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I can give you a list of the things I thought I knew. It's a big list. You know what I'm saying? And I thought my parents didn't know snot nose about nothing. Like, my parents are dumb. Like, what? Good gracious. How did I get so unlucky to have the dumbest parents? That's what I was thinking in my head. Man, my parents know absolutely nothing. Man, I was wrong. What changed, though? What changed in me? Yeah, I became a parent. I had some experiences that I had never experienced before. Some of them were experiences my parents tried to save me from. And to be honest with you, I could have learned the lesson without going through the experiences if I had just trusted them more than I trusted myself. Some people say, well, that's the only way you can learn is for you to go and make a mistake. That's not true. I learn a lot of things by looking at people in prison and saying, I don't want to do that. Never done those things. It's doable. But perspective. Once you've been through some things and your perspective begins to change, that's what he's saying here. When you engage in serving, your perspective changes. You hear me? When you engage in serving, your perspective changes. When we look at perspective, we realize that when our perspective changes, our priorities will follow. And then we get to the hard part of today. We get to the hard part here. So, all the way up until now, we've put some pieces together, and we've got this random thing, at least it seems random, right in the middle about, and here's the church leader's responsibilities, here's a job description, right? And this is why, because it's going to build them up, it's going to unite people, it's going to give them this new perspective. Wow, those things, like, man, this is great. They're going to be mature, like a full-grown, fully developed man. That's what their faith is going to be when they serve. These are great things. And then all of a sudden, we get to the part where it's like, oh, this is why. This is why this makes so much sense. And I'll be honest with you, if we had just skipped to this part where we're about to go to, if we had just skipped here and we had looked at it, it'd be like you walking into math class your freshman year and seeing letters and numbers without any context, understanding even how to count. That's the way you would look at it. You'd look at it and say, I don't need this. I've gotten this far, I don't need this. Because what we're about to read, there's a really good chance, if you don't understand the history of why we're about to read what we're about to read, that you would respond very similarly. You see, we get to a list that Paul refers to like he refers to clothing. And he wants to say, hey, there's some things that you've put on in terms of your clothing that I want you to take off, and I've got something to exchange it with. So you've put on some things that, it's like a shirt. This shirt needs to change. But don't worry, I'm not going to leave you naked and afraid. I've actually got a shirt for you to put back on to exchange it with you. He starts with just like 7 really common struggles that I want to walk us through just briefly. The first one, he says, hey, I need you to stop lying. I just need you to stop lying. I need you to stop like wanting the story to be bigger. I need you to stop making excuses. I need you to stop just not telling people that you're just not dependable. I need you to start actually showing up when you're going to show up. I just need you to stop lying. And he says, so take the lying shirt off. Would you take that thing off? Would you take the lying shirt off and would you replace it with the shirt I've got you? Would you replace it with the truth shirt? He goes to the second one. He says, hey, we got to stop. We got to take off. We've got to take off this kind of anger that causes us to make really bad decisions. Like getting angry, you're going to be angry. That's part of it. But I need you to stop getting angry. And because of that anger, you do something stupid. Right? Like you lose your temper, you go too far. Like anger is one thing. Again, we're going to get frustrated and get angry. But however, I need you to stop with this anger that causes you then to do something really wrong. I need you to stop with that. Take that shirt off. I've got something else for you to put on. Peace. That even in your anger, you can still be peaceful. He says, I need you to stop stealing stuff. Whether it's you're cheating and stealing that way, or you're lying and stealing that way, I need you to stop stealing stuff. I need you to take that stealing shirt off. Take it off. Get rid of it. And instead, he says, I want you to put on a go get a job shirt. He says, I want you to go to work. And then follow it up with, he says, I want you to be generous with what you get from your job. In other words, in this time, it's not only that he's got a shirt, he's got an undershirt and a shirt. You know what I'm saying? He's doubling it up. Though the job is the undershirt, and you get a nice little polo to go on top of it. Of generosity. He says, stop. He says, I need you to stop gossiping. He's like, I need you to stop gossiping. Now, as Christians, let me talk to the Christians in the room just for a second. We are so good at getting around the gossip thing. You know what I'm talking about? We call them prayer requests, right? That's what we call them. That's what we call them. And so what happens is, you're like, hey man, here's the deal. Did you hear? Let me pick somebody out real quick. Colin, you're such a good husband, good father, but we're going to pick on you for a second. This is not real. It's not real. Like, hey, did you hear what Colin did? No, dude, I didn't hear. Dude, I need you to pray for him because he did this last week. And you're like, oh my, shut up. I need to pray for that. Like, yeah. And then the person that's hearing it's like, who did he do that with? Because I need to pray for them too, you know? And it's like, well, that's what I don't know for sure, but I heard it was this. Oh my goodness. Does Lindsay know? Because I need to pray if she knows, or I need to pray if she don't know. Yeah, that's right. I need to pray for both of them. You know what I'm saying? Is there any other details I need to pray about? Can you let me know? Because when I pray, I want to make sure I'm informing God, okay? I need to let him know these details. That's what happens. That's what happens. He said, hey, look, if you're going to open your mouth about somebody, he says, take that gossip shirt off. Instead, put a shirt of encouragement on. If you're going to open your mouth and say words, it better be something that's going to build somebody up, not tear them to pieces behind their back. He says, hey, I need you to take off that sin, that shirt of sexual sin. I need you to take that off. I need you to take it off, which hearing him say, I need you to take that off in a sexual sin, that gets confusing, but you understand what he's saying, right? I don't have to clarify, you know? Say, hey, I need you to get rid of the sexual sin. I need you to take it off. Take it off. Now, you might be wondering, oh, well, can you be specific about this sexual sin? Because I need to know. Because in your mind, you're like, well, are some things okay, other things are not? Is there a line where we've crossed here? Yeah, I'll tell you this. The closest, greatest advice I can give you is that we get some pretty good specifics of what a sexual relationship ought to look like in the words that are given to us from the Father. He gives them actually some really pretty specific details. And anything that goes beyond that outside of a marriage, a biblical marriage, would be what this shirt is and the thing that you need to take off. Now, what it doesn't say is like, hey, because when we kind of, in particular in the sexual sin side of things, the sexual sin shirt, it's like, hey, okay, when I take that shirt off, it's not going to stop that I've got some thoughts that are here. Right? That's not going to stop immediately, because we can't stop some of those images that we've exposed ourselves to, or those moments that we've exposed ourselves to. It doesn't mean that the desire is going away. That doesn't mean that. It doesn't even mean the desire is going to squash any. In fact, it might actually increase. Right? Doesn't mean any of that. It just means that, you know what, I do have the ability to choose what I do and don't do with my body. And I also have the ability to choose and what someone else does in my direction towards my body. That I have the ability to choose that. And I can say no. It doesn't mean that craving is gone. It doesn't mean the desire is there. Even if the desires are unhealthy and the desires are not what God would want you to do, those things you might not be able to get rid of. However, you can always choose what you physically do. So he says, will you take off that sexual sin shirt and will you put on a self-control shirt? And the last one he says is, will you take off that drunkenness shirt, please? He said, hey, will you take off that drunkenness shirt? Now, what he didn't say was, hey, can you take off having a beer with the guy's shirt or having a glass of wine with dinner shirt? He didn't say that. Be very clear. He says, hey, can you take off that drunkenness shirt? You know why? Because there's people in your life who will need you, and they didn't know they were going to need you on a Friday night at 10:30, and you're probably their number one call person, and you should be available and ready to respond. You can't be incapacitated and say, man, I really wish I could be there, but I am lit. You know? Like they don't plan their tragedies. They don't plan when they need the people that are most dependable in their life. They don't plan that. And so he's saying, hey, if you're a follower of Jesus, will you take that shirt off? Will you stop excluding yourself from being available to them? Will you decide, hey, you know what? As a part of me understanding who I am supposed to be, will you stop that, please? He says, this shirt he gives us to put on instead, he says, if you want to be filled up on something, fill yourself on the Spirit of God and the things that he desires. He said, take that shirt off, put the other shirt on. And maybe you're thinking, that's the last on the list. He didn't say my thing, so I am good. No, it's not an exhaustive list. In fact, that's probably our best clue if that's the way we think, that we've got a lot of work to do. Because the truth is that any obstacle that comes in between you and being more like Jesus, it's on the list. It's just not written in this particular piece of the Bible that we're reading. But you know what those things are. And he's saying, would you take them off and put something back on? Now, I want to remind you, why are we talking about this? Because this is a really weird list right here. What was the thing that we started, this whole thing has been about up until I got to this list? Starts with an S. Serving. What does serving have to do with any of this list? That's so strange. That makes no sense. That makes perfect sense. Right? So we don't want to walk in day one, freshman math class, and see numbers and letters and not know how to count to 10. But think about it. Think about it. God chose you. The good shirts and the bad shirts. The I wish you throw them away shirts, the shirts you've been wearing since high school, they feel so good, but they got holes in them and they stink. And you need to get rid of them. Good shirts and bad shirts, he chose you, knowing all these specifics. Not only that, God moved in your direction. He says, it's not enough for me just to decide right here. I'm actually going to show you what I've chosen. I'm going to move in that direction. And not only that, I'm going to trust you so much with the work that I'm going to do in your life if you'll let me. I'm going to prepare in advance some incredible ways for you to partner with my movement in the direction of all of humanity. And the way that we're going to funnel all of this together is I'm going to gift you this incredible gift. It'll be messy, and at times you're going to have to just backhand somebody. But this is incredible moment of the church, this movement of the church. I'm going to gift you the church. And inside of the gifting of the church, you're going to be so unique and so diverse. But when you get together on one cause, you will just break down barriers and walls in the community unlike any other movement that the world's ever seen. And it isn't going to be just 30 minutes or 30 days after a tragedy or a triumph nationally. But no, you got staying power because you're the catalyst for unity, because you decide those things. Your responsibility, though, is to stay unified, and you can only choose that. Nobody else can choose you being unified other than you. And so you're going to have to wake up every day and say, you know what, I'm committed to one faith and one God and one baptism and one hope and one Father, one body of believers. I'm committed to that, and I'm choosing every day to commit in that direction because God moved in my direction, because he chose me, because he prepared for me, and he gifted me the church. And I'm aware that I've got a responsibility to choose unity. And I'm going to back that up, and I'm going to make sure that when I go to church, if I decide to be a part of a body of believers, I'm taking my stinking job description because I got expectations. Because my expectations have been given to me by Paul, who was speaking on behalf of God, that, hey, if I'm going to go plug in somewhere, I will be equipped for acts of service. Why do I want to be equipped for acts of service? Because service changes our perspective. And when our perspective changes, our priorities change. And so now with all of that being said, when I begin to think through in my life, how do I take off this sexual sin shirt? How do I take it off? It makes sense. Because before I got to the sexual sin change of clothes, I was already committed to serving other people. And so now I begin to look at the removal of this dirty old rag through the lens of how is it going to serve someone else. What's going to serve, if you're single, it's going to serve your future spouse. And you're serving her or him in an incredible way, and you're not even aware who they are yet. It's serving you. It's serving your children, because there are conversations you need to be able to have with integrity, that when you were confronted with the truth about Jesus, you made a decision to do things Jesus' way. It's serving the people that look up to you and will depend on you, because when you serve people, people are drawn to people they know they can depend on. And so now all of a sudden, we're not looking at an archaic book that says everything I do is wrong. No, we're looking at a life plan. We are a part of a movement of God. And when I begin to serve people as a key part of that movement of God, I'm going to realize that I've got some things to take off, because I want to be a better, bigger part of the movement of the kingdom of God. And at the end of the day, it's not about the simple, silly little sin. It's just a shirt. And by the way, he gives me an upgraded shirt to put on. He's not leaving me naked and homeless. I have a place to belong. I have a place to plug in. I've got something to get after that gives me purpose, and a place that's bigger than myself, and I'm attached to it. And so when I identify things in my life that keeps me from being an incredible part of that movement, it's an easy decision. It's difficult to pull off, but it's an easy decision to say, you know what, I got to get rid of this shirt. I got to get rid of it. Why would I want to keep it? What's the point? A shirt might be glued to us. Might be a little tighter than a Band-Aid that's going to be ripped off. But all of a sudden you realize there are some people around you that are in that same community of believers that'll give you some assistance in the change. Truth is, if you want to make a change in your life, start with how you serve. If you want to make a change in your life, begin with who you serve. Serving changes perspective. And a serving perspective is the perspective of Jesus. In fact, he even goes so far to say it himself about himself. He says, for even the Son of Man, referring to himself, even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. This past week, we were in our small group, and we were studying a story that Jesus tells in the Bible, and this theme of serving just kind of naturally came up because of the story we were reading. And so at the end, I always say, hey, is there any questions, whatever, and we go back and forth on some questions, and we had this really great question pop up. And so the question, we were talking about serving, and she was like, hey, so what if you decide to serve, right? What if you decide to serve, like you're doing it, but while you're serving, you're not happy about it. Like you're frustrated, you know? Like inside, you're just like, I really am upset that they asked me to do this, you know? Right? Like I'm just, you know? And so on the inside, it's like, man, I cannot believe I'm getting milk for that girl. She got her own grocery store. She got me up here getting milk for her, right? That kind of thing. Like what happens if that's what's on the inside? That's what's happening. What do you do then? I think it's a really simple answer. Practice makes perfect. The truth is that it takes some time for our mind to fully catch up to what God wants to do in our lives. You know, there's rarely anything good for us that we get super pumped about immediately. You know, when you're trying to eat better and all of a sudden there's this cheesecake with that strawberry top and you're like, oh, hey, how you doing? I'm about to drool all over you, right? Like in that moment, it's like, okay, right here, I know the right thing I ought to do, but I actually am going to be super pissed at myself that I don't enjoy this, right? And so I'm torn. Like on the inside, it's like, this doesn't feel like the right decision, but I know that it is. And so we just got to continue doing the right thing, whether we feel like it or not, because the truth is we know what the right thing is. And the feelings will catch up. The feelings will catch up. The feelings are always the last thing. If we're waiting to feel like this is the good thing to do, if we're waiting to feel like this is a movement, if we're waiting on feelings can be deceptive. I'll tell you, there are people on this planet, and I'm not excluded from it, that have woken up on days and felt like they were absolutely worthless to themselves, to their family, to everybody else. You think God whispered that in our ears that morning? No. No. The enemy whispered it in our ears that morning because he has access to our feelings just like God does. He can convince us of the craziest feelings. But what he doesn't have access is changing the truth. And so we serve. We inconvenience ourselves for the good of others. And we do that because God chose us. He moved towards us. He prepared in advance for us to be a part of it. He gifted us the church, and now there's a responsibility to be equipped to serve, because serving changes our perspective. And when our perspective changes, our priorities change. And when our priorities change, we align ourselves with Jesus, and we get rid of all these extra nasty clothes, and we exchange them for something better. Serving is a key piece and part of it. If you walk away with anything else today, it's this: my responsibility to serve. My responsibility is to serve.